give a warm welcome to the hosts of The Bride of Alternate Ending.
Hello, ghouls and goblins, and welcome back to A Bride of Alternate Ending. What do I say next? Oh, yes, I am your ghost, Brennan Klein, and with me, as always, is your co-ghost, Tim Brayton. How are you doing, Tim?
I'm doing good, and your little ghost joke is even more on point than usual because we actually have a ghost story to talk about today,
Do
which we
we?
do not always. It's a ghost story-ish. It's campfire story-ish.
Yes, it's definitely that. It doesn't not have a ghost, but that's probably not the primary subgenre I would attach to it, especially because this is the first week of Witchcraft Month, or first
It
episode of
is.
Witchcraft Month.
It is indeed.
Our gentle Patreon subscribers voted for us to watch the 1967 Soviet film V, and I'm glad they did because it has been sitting on my to-watch pile for how many years are there that I've been alive? It's been a long time.
Oh wow, that's much more than I can claim. It's only been sitting on my to-watch pile since like 2021 or 2020. So
No, yeah, that's fair. I think it literally joined my pile in 2020 or so is when I got the Blu-ray, but it's been on my radar of like, oh, I gotta watch that for about a decade, and we finally did. So I'm happy that happened, if nothing else.
good. I I will get into the story of why it joined my to-watch pile because it's complicated in an uninteresting way. So
Oh, okay.
yes.
Um, Now I'm curious, but I won't ask because I've been warned. I am doomed. Don't walk over to Camp Blood where the story of Tim's V DVD lives.
No, I will talk about it. I want to get into it a little bit before we talk about it because it's related to other things.
Okay. So, I mean, I know you have some basic context you want to share before we dive in, right?
Well, I don't know that it's worth sharing the context in advance or just sort of seeding it in, but this is some fun facts, shall we say, about V. This is the first horror film produced by the Soviet Union's state-owned film industry, which is to say the first one produced in the Soviet Union because there was no other option. Um, and the Soviet Union was ruthlessly materialist. That was sort of official state doctrine. And we have this thing that happened in the early 1960s when Nikita Khrushchev became the premier, where he began loosening some of the strictures on what you could and could not do socially, couldn't do in art. It's often called the Khrushchev thaw, and that kind of leads to many things. I mean, like it leads to just a general sort of freeing of Soviet society, but one thing it sort of manifests in is about a 6 to 7 year window in which all of the arts, including cinema, just get to be a little more interesting. Because during Stalinism, uh, basically all the movies that got made had to meet one specific criterion, which was that Joseph Stalin had to enjoy them. And he had awful pedestrian tastes, setting aside all of his other noteworthy demerits as a human being, of which there are so many. He liked really tacky, sentimental crud. And so we have this entire genre called socialist realism, which is basically just these tediously uplifting sentimental tales of the proletariat being like rosy cheeked and earnest. Um, Stalin dies, the world rejoices. Movies improve in the Soviet Union, and this is at the very tail end of that process. This comes out in 1967, and that's about the last year that the thaw hasn't pretty much refrozen. Is 1967. So so that's kind of where we are. We are at this moment when Soviet cinema is ready to do just kind of this phantasmagorical, not in any way socialist realism, and it based substantially in Eastern Orthodox religion, which is something that was also pretty much a big old no-no to talk about in any sort of not wholly condemnatory way prior to the 1960s.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I mean we'll get into this when we talk about the film as a whole. But I would say it's a reasonably anti-religious film.
I was gonna say, when you said its primary genre was not ghost story, I assume that's because its primary genre is obviously anti-clerical satire.
Yeah, exactly. And witches are in there a little bit, and then just kind of the general phantasmagoria, as you said. Um, but yeah, it does kind of. I mean, I don't know if this actually plays out for the ending or not, but it does a little bit have that thing of that, like all of the new James Wan ghost stories have, which is that, you know, the tools that you use to battle this villain are religious tools. So it has in some way this implication that the structures of the religion are in some way hold power or are holy.
It's definitely a kind of a weird balance where religion per se is right, but religious, like members of religious orders, are not.
Yeah, exactly.
It's sort of the needle that the movie's trying to thread.
Yeah, so it's not anti-religious in that way, but it's certainly the like anti-humans dabbling in religion in any major way.
Yes. Like God exists, Jesus Christ existed, Russian Orthodox monks are a whole bunch of boobs. Is sort of where the movie's at.
Very much.
Which, to
Yeah,
be
so
fair, is also where just a substantial amount of Russian culture has always been.
yeah, fair enough.
And actually, point of order, I'm going to keep making this mistake because I, like many people, just sort of use Russian as a synonym for Soviet. The film is actually set in its entirety within what is now Ukraine.
Yes. And the lead is a Cossack, as he keeps reminding us.
Indeed.
He is a Cossack in a cassock, which is one of my favorite things about this movie.
It
um,
sounds like you should write a full on musical number about that. I
mhm.
feel like that's a good phrase.
Thank you, thank you. And he could dance to it because he's a pretty decent dancer, as we learned in
Yeah.
V. um. Anyway, do you have more context before we dive into some of the movie itself?
Uh, I think the only other thing worth pointing out, this is an adaptation of a story by Nikolai Gogol, who is a very, very major 19th century Russian novelist and short story writer, who was born in the region that is now called Ukraine, was primarily raised in the region that is now called Russia, and was sort of very cosmopolitan. So he kind of himself was this bridge between sort of the Russian macro culture and this kind of niche Ukrainian culture. And I imagine we will talk a little bit about my understanding, at least, of what the difference between those things is, because it does matter. But Gogol's thing was to kind of create these uncanny, grotesque, otherworldly tales.
Ooh.
That was like what he did. He wasn't like, I don't think we would call him a horror story author, because I don't know if we would have such a thing as horror stories when he was active, and he was active in the first half of the 19th century. Um, but he certainly was interested in folklore. He actually, the text version of V and the film version of V present themselves as his faithful transcription of a traditional folktale, which does not appear to be true,
Yeah, as far as I can
for the
tell,
record.
as far as I've been able to tell in my own research, V is a fictional concoction of Gogol and not an actual figure
That
in.
that has been the literary consensus. V is an important text. Like the movie maybe not, but the text is like a piece that has been much analyzed for what it is worth.
Oh, okay, I actually did not know that. I'm aware of Gogol as a writer, obviously, but I was not aware of his involvement in the story that is V before I watched the movie.
That
And
is
it
that is
begins with an
fair.
epigraph from Gogol himself.
Yes.
Um, but yeah, so I guess I would say I'm glad to have you here for the context as far as the kind of broader historical context. I actually have a fair amount of context for Russian and Soviet cinema just as a viewer because I took in college in film school, one of my requirements was to take a foreign cinema class, and like anyone in film school, I was like, oh, I'll take a French cinema class and be fancy. But that one was full, so they gave me
Oh
Russian cinema.
no.
And I was kind of bummed, but it actually I really enjoyed almost everything that we watched in that class. And I found it very illuminating.
And I feel like that's a trade up because I think that you come to French cinema, like French cinema is too big of a black hole to not suck you in. I think if you don't have a tour guide taking you through Russian cinema, you won't get there.
Yes, no, I totally agree. And we did everything from obviously you got to do Battleship Potemkin, but we did everything from like Ballad of a Soldier to Black Lightning, which is a 2008 movie about a kid who finds a flying car, and it's basically a superhero movie.
That's awesome. I have taken a class on Russian cinema as well with a wonderful human being. I don't know if it's appropriate to name her on the podcast or not, but a professor at the time at UW Madison who was herself Russian. She was a native of, I believe, Moscow. Um, and UW Madison has a reputation, or had a reputation. I'm afraid it's no longer true, of being one of the center points for the study of Russian cinema in the English language. So I feel like between the two of us, we probably have a pretty. I bet we know more than the Joe on the street about Russian cinema. Is what I'm saying.
Yeah. No, that's exactly it. Like I would far from try to proclaim myself as an expert, but it is something that I am interested in, and not just because I have a crush on Sergei Bodrov Jr., who died in an avalanche, which is the most Russian way to go.
That's a pretty Russian way to die.
But anyway, so that's kind of what we bring into this movie, because this movie is it's so of its context.
Hmm.
But anyway, so it opens on basically seminary school being let out for spring break, basically.
Basically,
All the young men with those horrible haircuts that are kind of hot sometimes. Is that just me?
and that's just you.
Okay, good to know.
I mean, it's probably not just you. It is just you in this podcast.
Yeah, fair enough. It's they all look like how Robin, the Swedish singer, looked like in 2009. But anyway, so we follow these three young men who are traveling through the countryside. It's actually shades of American Werewolf in London in that opening sequence.
A little bit, a little bit.
They're wandering through this very kind of barren, forested stretch of land. They are lost. It's getting dark, and they decide to try to spend the night in this farmhouse that they find. They are obviously, seminary students, so they are uncouth young men who are just rabble rousers and just being irritating.
Yeah, no, it is made very clear in the opening scene that these three individuals in particular have caused the seminary some small amount of trouble with the amount of boozing and if not fucking, then at least like talking up the ladies that they get up
Carousing.
to. Yes.
But yeah, so they're basically like banging on the gate of this house and trying to climb over the fence. And this old woman comes out and she's like, "Fine, you can sleep here, but no food." And basically, she separates them all and she puts one of them, Father Comma or brother Comma, sorry. Um, he sleeps in a hay bale in the loft in the barn, and in the middle of the night, she sneaks in and basically charms him so she can ride him like a horse and then fly into the sky on his back.
But but not ride him like a horse in some sort of fun euphemistic way, like literally clamber onto his shoulders and ride him as though he was a pack animal.
Yes, which is that is the first sequence where I was like, okay, I'm for moments and flashes on the wavelength of this movie.
Because they pipe in horse noises while this is happening.
They do. Oh,
It's delightful.
yeah, it is I guess I should mention, yeah, a lot. There's a lot of wacky material, especially in the first half of the movie.
There is, I would say, primarily wacky material. I made a joke about it being an anti-clerical satire, but that wasn't a joke. That's just a statement
Yeah,
of fact. If on the horror slash comedy balance, this one lists so hard towards comedy, I would
yeah,
say.
and certainly it does so in these sequences that are not where the witch is not present, and that is
Hmm.
a great deal of the movie.
Yeah.
But yeah, so she kind of flies around on him. In response, he beats her to death with a stick, as you do. When
To be fair, he
uh-huh.
beats her to within an inch of her life with a stick
Yes.
and then runs away.
Yes, you're right. He
Because it's very important that she's not dead yet.
you're right. He beats the life out of her, and he beats many years out of her because she ends up as a beautiful young woman, just basically dying in the dirt. He eventually finds his way back to the seminary, where his I don't know, big boss priest man. I don't know
There's
orthodox
undoubtedly
words.
there's undoubtedly a specific term for the priest who is in charge of the seminarians.
Certainly there is. It is not present in my brain, but he says, "Oh, the young daughter of a wealthy rich man out in the boonies is dying, and she has requested that you, speak prayers over her for 3 nights. She's
You by name, she has
yes,
asked for this particular student, Coma Bruta.
yeah." So he, goes out there, and of course, it turns out to be the witch woman that he beat to within an inch of her life. That inch is now gone. She is dead. Or something. She is in a twilight space of mortality.
Mm-hmm.
um, and this is where the movie, like, really, it definitely forgets about the other two characters that he was hanging out with, which I was surprised by. They never really come up again. Are they the two at the end, or
They're the two at the
they
end.
are? Okay. So they do show up at the very end in what in modern times would be a post credit stinger.
Pretty
um, but yeah, they just are kind of forgotten about for the rest of the movie, which was
much.
peculiar to me. But anyway, so he gets sent back. Well, not. It's a different house as well, right? It's not the farmhouse where he was originally,
Um,
or is it?
I believe it is different. Well, he doesn't recognize where he's at, so it would
Yeah,
presumably be a different place.
yeah, and where he is, it's kind of like a compound, like a village with multiple.
It's like a small. It's a town centered around this kind of rich person's
Yeah,
estate, which is, I believe, how towns were structured at this point in time
yeah,
in the rural Russian steppe.
fair enough. Yeah, so basically, he has to spend 3 consecutive nights saying prayers over this dead body. And of course, each night, increasingly spooky happenings occur. Uh, as soon as he gets in there, he like draws a chalk. Well, he lights a bunch of candles. He draws a chalk circle around the lectern where he will be reading from the good
Yeah,
book.
it's too bad that this movie was set in what now is called Ukraine and not what is now called Georgia. Because if it was set in Georgia, we could say that he drew a Caucasian chalk circle. Eh, eh.
Uh
It's a Brecht play. Title of a
oh
Brecht play.
oh okay. That was. I actually was literally talking about Brecht this morning, but I am not aware of that play. So
That is a particular play by Brecht, the Caucasian chalk circle.
okay, good to know. So thank you for that.
I saw that happen in the movie and it was like I cannot wait to take way too long of a walk to set up a very bad joke that Brennan will not get.
No, that is always worth it to do.
I
Um,
think so.
that's something I do with my boyfriend Ben a lot too, where it's like I'm gonna make a joke about Lauren Marie Taylor from Friday the 13th Part Two, and he's not gonna get it, but it's gonna be very funny, so it has to happen.
That's my one of my favorite kinds of jokes is the like I am straight up not even pretending you know what I'm talking about, and that's the
hmm
most amusing part of all.
Exactly. I at
So
least
chalk circles are drawn. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
yeah. No, I was like, I at least once you explained it, I had the context to get myself
To
there 75%.
understand why it was in theory witty.
Yes, exactly. But yeah, so basically the first night, the witch wakes up, she gets out of her coffin and she starts trying to get into his chalk circle and she's like, banging on the invisible wall like a mime.
Mhm.
And that's kind of it for that one, but obviously things progress
Well,
from
well,
there.
one thing we figure out by this point, because she is in her apparent death state until he, to rouse himself and to keep himself sort of fortified in this spooky environment, he does a pinch of snuff and he sneezes, and the sneeze wakes her up. And what we then
Mm.
discover is that she is not, she cannot see him, but she can hear him. So she's sort of trying to hear him out.
Yes, you're right. That particular detail I forgot.
Well, because it's just that sort of feeds into a plot point later.
Yeah,
Is
yeah,
the
yeah.
reason I think it matters.
You mean the sneeze thing or the eyes thing?
The seeing and not seeing.
Yes, 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 yes. Um, but yeah. So basically, you know, things are gonna get kookier from here.
Indeed.
Um, there. I mean, you can't spoil V. That's an unspoilable movie, I would argue. So should we just kind of?
I think we should just plow our way through it. If for some reason you are concerned with how the end of this movie that could only conceivably end one way goes, skip ahead a little bit. But I think we should just plow right through it.
Yeah. Okay. So second night, she basically gets on top of the coffin and starts riding it like a surfboard through the air,
It's
which
pretty
is
great. It's pretty great.
pretty awesome. And then, of course, the third night is when she calls upon the creatures of the night to come attack.
Yeah, she's finally sick and tired of trying to spook him by herself, so she's just like, "All right, time for an undead army," and they attack, and it's creepy.
Yeah, and we will get to that. I think the final 11 minutes of this movie are probably the most important reason that the movie has stuck around in any sort of popular consciousness.
I would say so. Certainly, in terms of talking about this as a horror movie, that is you must address those minutes
Yeah.
because they are where most of it occurs.
Mm-hmm.
Because, as I
But
said, it is primarily a comedy about a useless seminary student.
yeah, and to that degree, not that part's not really on my wavelength. I don't know. I guess I could get into the concept of a religious satire, but it's so steeped in religious tradition at the same time, and especially a tradition I don't have a lot of personal familiarity with.
Mhm.
So the specifics of the ways that we are mocking this thing, I'm like, I'm sure I probably agree, but I don't really know. I don't have enough context for like what Russian Orthodox religion looks like, especially in the
Sure.
'60s. That
I mean, in the '60s, it doesn't look like much
oh,
because it
oh,
is
okay,
it
yeah.
is illegal.
Well, I mean, okay, well, because this is a period piece, so like the
That's right.
period being depicted,
Yes, yes. No, I know what you mean.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
I think it is kind of worth probably touching on, and this is one of the pieces of context I wanted to hold off until the time was right, and the time is right, I think. This is a pretty faithful adaptation of the story. It is it's sort of the thing where if you haven't read the story recently, you will remember very clearly several passages and several incidents and scenes. All of them are represented in the film. So like it very much covers the stuff you care about from V. Uh the main shift that the movie makes, the story is much less avowedly fixated on how the seminarian is a doofus. Like that's not part of it because I think sort of inherently literature about seminary students never respects the seminary students because they're seminary students. Jesus H Christ. Uh, but the point of the movie is mocking him and the sort of structure of seminary life in a way that the point of the story is not. And I do take that to be the cost of making this movie in Soviet Russia, even even in the late thaw era.
yeah. No, that's probably fair, and I don't think that that's the wrong move for the movie to make. I think that the comedy is very broad for my
It is
tastes.
it is super broad.
Especially like there's sequences that are just supposed to be flat out funny. Like he's trying to escape out of the back of a wagon that's in motion, and he thinks that all the old men who are bringing him to the village are asleep, but they kind of like open their eyes and they're watching him, and that's just not LOL
And that's
fuel for me.
that's legit. And I will say, I'm about to say a sentence that's kind of ridiculous.
Okay, I'm ready.
Uh, I was gonna say this is one of the first, if not the first, Soviet comedy that I've seen that I've actually thought was funny. But then that raises the immediate question: how many Soviet comedies have I seen? And and the answer might be just this one because it's not a funny film industry. They don't do comedy really.
Not classically.
And there's actually this is maybe a fun fact you encountered in your Russian class. I certainly encountered it in mine. This has nothing to do with what we're talking about, but I think it's worth sharing. In the teens, when the Russian film industry, pre-Soviet, mind you, was really trying to get on its feet, and it was trying to compete with all the other big national cinemas, which at that point were France, the U.S., and Germany. They decided, sort of as like an industrial like norm, the thing that was going to distinguish Russian cinema. And when you were going to go, you're in Italy or you're in Japan or you're in wherever, and you're going to watch a Russian film, um, what you want to be in for. They decided their thing was going to be that all of their movies were going to be tragedies without jokes, and that was going to be like the rule of Russian filmmaking. And I think that's adorable. I think that's insanely Russian, and I think that
Yeah.
it kind of it it stretches its tendrils out into at least like the 90s in Soviet and Russian cinema. But I will say in general, I find Russian humor extremely impenetrable to a degree where I won't tell you that the Gogol story is not meant to be funny. I will tell you I don't find it funny and I don't think it has jokes. Uh, but I just find Russian humor like a brick wall. I actually sort of thought that this was amusing, and that feels like a major shift to me.
Yes, very. I mean, it's very clearly intended to be amusing, and it's just not. For the most part,
No, I mean it's
amusing.
it's not landing for you. I get that, but it did land for me, which was amazing because they don't ever to me
Yeah, no,
land.
that's fair. I do have a question. Have you seen? I think it's from '69. There's a movie called The Diamond Arm. That's a Russian movie.
I have not seen that one.
That one was kind of funny, and that's a wacky movie.
Okay.
So this would have been, I guess, rethawed, but a little goofy.
I mean, I don't think goofiness versus not goofy was a sort of rule. Because I mean, Stalin liked movies that were certainly very like heartwarming.
Mm. Yeah, I don't know. Anyway, so yeah, this is just broad in a way. Like, there's definitely types of humor that I watch where I'm like, oh, Tim's gonna respond to that, and I'm just not quite there. I think your tolerance for shtick is a lot higher, especially probably because of the 1930s comedies that you love and silent film reels and whatnot.
I, to a certain extent, I only like shtick, like comedy that's not in some way based on kind of like broad, goofy. You can see this coming from a mile away type jokes. I don't always respond to.
hmm
Sometimes
And
I do.
yeah, no, that's fair, and sometimes I do too. It's just it's just kind of a crapshoot for me for this, and this one largely landed on the wrong side of that.
That's fair.
But yeah, my comic instincts were born from a really toxic miasma of online absurdism from the mid 2000s. So my sense of humor is really, and plus Douglas Adams' Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. So I'm really all over the place.
Well, I mean, whomst among us can say to have been fully freed of the influence of Douglas Adams?
Oh,
Like he is one of the great Englishmen of letters.
oh, for sure. But it's just like I got all of that kind of swirling around, and I don't always have
Sure.
time for like of an extremely broad kind of vaudevillian style.
And this is that like the way that the filmmakers, and we actually haven't talked about the personnel in this movie at all, directed by Konstantin Yershov and Georgy Kropatchev, and our main seminarian Koma Bruto is played by Leonid. I'm gonna fuck this one up.
Brezhnev.
Leonid, yes, in a very wacky Nixon on Laugh-In style cameo. Leonid Karavilov. No, that wasn't it. Karavlyov. Yes, I think it is right actually. Anyway, they film our good friend Leonid uh, with a lot of like close-ups that sort of allow him to bug his eyes out and mug, and it sort of feels like if they had been more steeped in a Western like broad comedy and cartoon tradition, they might have known that you can go for the wacky sproing noise at some of these reaction shots.
Yeah, as you said, when they add the horse sounds in at some point, like they're not immune to kind of Mickey Mousing the soundtrack a little bit, but no, they don't
But the
fully
the
lean in.
horse sounds I think are almost meant to be uncanny, whereas I feel like they left on the table plenty of like wacky sound effects
Yeah, no,
because
that is true.
they're doing some wacky visuals, is what I'm saying. Like it's a goofy looking movie in a lot of ways.
It's very goofy, but I do think that you're right because that tone does permeate the entire thing. But I think where when it kind of combines with the horror, especially the kind of like lo-fi, low budget horror that they are doing here, but still with packed with imagination, it does accomplish a kind of sense of the uncanny. I think it
Mm,
does it does feed into this
absolutely.
kind of Sam Raimi Evil Dead atmosphere.
There's a ton of Evil Dead in this, or should we say there's a ton of V in Evil Dead? And the answer is probably
Yeah.
neither, because I doubt very much that Sam Raimi saw this film, or even had access to this film,
Yeah.
frankly. But and clearly, by virtue of having made their film 20 years before Evil Dead 2, they clearly had not seen that. But I almost feel like the sort of broad tone helps sell the horror because God love them when we see the monsters, particularly when we see the V, which is the sort of climactic demon who comes when the witch is finally like, okay, we are just done fucking around with this priest.
Uh-huh.
Bring on the big guns. The big guns are the V. Um, the V looks like he should be fighting William Shatner at Vasquez Rocks, to be blunt about it. Like there's
Or,
just hmm,
yeah, or he looks like Megalon's dumpy younger cousin.
there's a lot of that as well. So it's like there is not a tradition in Soviet cinema of horror effects work. There's barely a tradition of any kind of effects work. I think they've made a couple sci-fi movies by this point. Um, so it's not that they don't know what they're doing, they just have never exercised these skills. They don't necessarily have a standard of comparison. And so we end up with some pretty goofball looking monsters. But I think having read into the film that broad tone, it doesn't feel film breaking because it's still sort of married to this like very aggressive horror and uncanny feeling. So even though objectively the monsters in the last 10 minutes just look bad, they work really well, I think.
Yeah, they look bad, but they don't always look like I can tell what's going on here. Like some there's like little skeleton creatures where it's like, okay, that's a kid or a little person in a skeleton
Mm-hmm.
costume. But some of it just looks weird. And that is valuable.
Yes. There's a great shot of like these guys who've been painted teal, like crab walking down a floor that has been designed to look like a wall, and then it's filmed at an angle so it looks like they're crab walking down a wall. It's terrific.
Yeah, it's really cool. And there's all these things where it's like, hands bursting out of holes in the walls that I mean, again, we don't know who saw V or not, but it felt very like that scene in Day of the Dead, that nightmare sequence.
It does feel that way. I hadn't thought about it. I guess for me, hands bursting out of walls just so directly takes me back to the Jean Renoir Beauty and the Beast that I just assume that everybody in the world who has a hand in a wall in the same shot is thinking of that. But that's probably just me.
Yeah, fair enough. Hands and walls, gotta have them. Um, but there's this also this very disorienting kind of kaleidoscopic thing where they're kind of filming the actor in like I think they were using a rotating room. If I'm
It
correct.
must be. It has to
Yeah,
be.
but there's just this like kind of swirly teal gray background just kind of spinning around Brother Kama quite frequently throughout these sequences. It's
That's
really
true.
disorienting.
There's also a fantastic shot. It's during the surfing coffin scene where they like point the camera up. It's a POV shot of her above his head, and the like peaked ceiling behind her is just whirling like a spirograph, and it is really disorienting and really creepy. And I loved it. And I'm pretty sure that's a process shot.
Yeah, that makes sense. But yeah, no, they've got these kind of manic design aesthetic ideas that are really really fun and just really provocative. And so for the cumulative 12 to 15 minutes that this is happening splattered throughout the movie, it is a very, very fun movie. Like I said, the comedy stuff didn't hit quite so well with me. And then, look, I'm a fucking rube. So anytime you introduce a structural system, like obviously this movie is going to take place over 3 nights, that just reminds me like, I gotta do 3 of these. Okay, we gotta get through this. And so I'm kind of like ticking them off in my head rather than actually experiencing the story if I'm not fully invested.
I think that's a really good point, and it actually reminds me of just sort of a general complaint I've heard about like list songs and whatnot. Uh, I think in this particular case that didn't bother me too much, largely because there's such a like abrupt quality where like he does the night, things go creepy. The next day he sort of meets the ruffians in the local tavern, and they like josh him for a few minutes, and then all of a sudden he's back in for the next night. Like it feels like it happens very quickly to me.
It does. So it's not
It's a
like yeah.
Well, I was gonna say it's a short and fast paced movie. We haven't actually
Yes.
said this. It's 76 minutes long.
Yes. So yeah, that it's not exactly a problem. Like in a more plodding movie, that would definitely be a huge problem for me. But just anytime a movie opens and it's like chapter 1, I'm like, fuck, there's gonna be chapters. So like I don't know which one's gonna be the last chapter, and then if chapter 3 feels like the end, and then chapter 4 shows up, I'm gonna have to sit through 30 more minutes of a movie. Um,
I I have an anecdote about that has nothing to do with V, but I think is still amusing to me,
okay.
so I'm telling it regardless. Uh so Dogville, the Lars von Trier film, which I assume, like all of us, you have seen and love and probably own several copies of. Have you seen Dogville?
I have not, but I know what it is.
So Dogville's subtitle is like a story in 12 parts or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's a story in 13, I forget. It tells you right at front that it's going to have chapters and how many of them there will be. And it's a 3-hour movie. And so me and a bunch of friends, when we sit down to watch, we're like, 3 hours of this, it's going to be miserable. We start watching it, and it seems to be just clipping along. And we're like, this is actually kind of great. It's kind of moving really fast. We get to chapter 11, and we're like, man, this movie is just flying by. Like, how could we have ever thought it was it was slow paced? We paused real quick before chapter 12 because someone needed to use the bathroom. And that's when we discovered that chapter 12 is 50% of the running time of Dogville.
Jesus.
So we're all like, wow, what a fast 2.5 hours that was. And it's been like 70
Oh
minutes.
God.
I don't like Dogville. I think it's bad.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like my cup of tea, personally. I mean, I'm not a Lars von Trier head, really, by any stretch of the imagination.
You don't seem the type.
No. Um, I was deeply shocked. He did Nymphomaniac, right? That's von Trier?
He did. Yeah.
Yes. I was definitely surprised by how many fly fishing metaphors were present in that movie.
There are. And like what's weird to me, and this is not a Lars von Trier podcast, so we should stay here too long, but given how Nymphomaniac feels like a very central example of the Lars von Trier thing, that it is my second favorite Lars von Trier film feels really strange to me because I by and large don't like him, but I kind of love Nymphomaniac. It's weird to me.
Okay, I can get it. But yeah, no, I the von Trier thing, yeah, not for me. But anyway, so yeah, when stuff is structured like that, it is a problem for me. Especially if I'm not vibing with the movie because it's like, oh, there's more movie. I know there is. And you're right
And
that
maybe that's why it felt fast to me. I was vibing with it pretty hard.
yeah, no, and it's a fucking short movie. But the thing is the shortness of the days, obviously it does feel like that kind of campfire story thing. It's kind of just like time is blending and it's this kind of, it's part of the phantasmagoria or whatever. But also the nights feel really short. And I think that's a problem for me as far as this movie's ability to deliver on a horror atmosphere in any way. Because basically it's like he shows up in the church, she torments him for 5 minutes, at least the first 2 nights, that's how it goes. She torments him for 5 minutes, and then the cock crows and she goes away. And it doesn't feel like this grind you down perilous experience that it's obviously delivering to him because he's losing his mind. He's kind of like
Hmm.
being worn down. He's losing himself in drink. He can't sleep. Like he's having all these problems. But for me, I'm like, look, a lady tapped in my circle for 5 minutes and then went to sleep. Like it didn't feel grueling to me in the way that it did to the character.
I can see that. That seems legitimate. And I feel like if this was more aggressively trying to be a horror film, that hopefully is something that filmmakers would have addressed because it is it is a horror comedy or just a comedy pretty much its entire running time. I think only those last 10 minutes make any claim to being more horror than comedy.
Mm-hmm.
And even then, I think it's closer to a 50-50 mix. I would say it always to me feels like comedy is a really important part of this, even at its like absolute most openly trying to scare me moments.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I do think that again, because a big part of what the movie is doing is just being like this seminarian is a bozo. Uh, that at least explains why that's a strategy they pursued, if not quite explains whether or not it works. I don't
Yeah.
know. It worked for me, but again, I was already on the movie's wavelength, and it sounds like you were most certainly not.
Yeah, well, it's another one of those things where the parts that aren't clicking with me, I get why they would click with someone who's not me.
Fair.
Like I'm fully on board with the movie's right to do the thing that it's doing. But while the final 12 minutes are spectacular and I think would click with anyone who is on any single one of the film's wavelengths that it has,
Mm,
um, and it's certainly the thing that I've heard people talk about the most. Um, it just as a whole was not for me.
that is fair. That is fair. It it worked for me really on a lot of levels. I did like even more than just those last 12 minutes. I think actually the single thing that most like kind of threw me for a loop uncanniness wise, I think it's on the first night because I don't think he realizes that she's undead yet. He sees the corpse like tearing up and crying, and then the tear like starts rolling down her cheek and turns red or turns magenta. We're supposed to think, oh no, it just turned into blood, and it's
Uh-huh.
clearly not blood. But it's a kind of like lo-fi but super cool effect of the like water that they've dripped onto her face, like changing color as it rolls down some makeup powder that we are not quite noticing, I gather.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and it worked on me. I was like, oh, that's cool. It felt like something out of like an ambitious American B movie or like, an episode of Star Trek or something like
Mm-hmm.
that. Again, there's a
No,
there's a lot
yeah,
of Star Trek to me in this movie, and I think that might be part of where I'm vibing with it.
yeah. No, that's totally fair. um, and that's cool. Like, and I can really vibe with a lo-fi kind of effect like that. The lo-fi effect that I cannot vibe with is what happens immediately after the tear falls, which is that there's a hard cut and it vanishes, and it's really it.
That's a bummer. That was a
Yeah,
big bummer.
I don't know if I can explain why that felt so clunky to me, but it's like there's like a really choppy cut. There might be a twinkle on the soundtrack. It just feels a little too obvious in what it's doing, I think.
It is a pretty abrupt jump cut, and I that's an effect that it exists for. It is the oldest effect. It is quite
Yeah.
literally the first visual effect in movies was the stop rolling the camera, change something, start again. And there's something charming to it up through at about 1904. And for the
Yeah.
subsequent 119 years of cinema, it just doesn't work.
Yeah, I think there's something I don't know, maybe it's because that if I see something disappearing in a modern movie, there's more it's less abrupt. It fades instead of going from there to not there within the space of a
Mm.
cut. I don't
Well,
know.
we have a fancy tool now called morph cutting that they
Yeah.
didn't have until like 2012.
Yeah, no, so again, I'm not quite sure what I'm reacting
Well, because
poorly to.
this one doesn't work even by the standards of that effect is the thing.
Okay,
It's like
yeah.
I know the exact moment you're talking about, and it did completely like scatter me a little bit. It didn't work.
Yeah, I don't know, maybe it's just drawing too much attention to the filmmaking of it.
Could be that.
Um,
Could be that the tear moment works so well that the fact that it's directly chased by something that doesn't work really just feels like a kind of swing from, oh, y'all actually don't know what you're doing. Like you're just kind of making up horror filmmaking rules on the fly.
yeah, no, it just yeah, that didn't work for me. It's just like it's too silly after a moment that was working. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
Um, because like yeah, I mean I like it in Trip to the Moon where they hit the monsters and then it does a smash cut to just like a pile of a plume of smoke like
Hmm.
that's fun. But this just didn't do it for me
Just
unfortunately.
did not land. No, I agree.
Anyway, are there things that did land for you that we haven't talked about? It's a pretty simple movie.
I mean, it is a pretty simple movie. It is campfire story logic. Um, I'm into the low finess of it in general, like the very early on when they're in Kiev and they're getting sort of the riot act read to them by the seminary boss, who's like, you're all gonna go get drunk and feel up horrors, and there's nothing I can do about that, but I want you to know that God's mad at you.
Uh huh.
Um, and they're so obviously standing in front of a backdrop that has like the city of Kiev painted behind them, and I find that deeply endearing as the like first scene of this movie.
That is true. There's an extremely indoors outdoor marketplace also that immediately follows that.
That absolutely is the case, yes.
No, and I that is a vibe I can get on.
Yeah, the like the sound stages that were made on very little budget. Again, it's the Star Trek of it, right? Like
Mhm.
that's where I'm at. Always all the time. So I like that part of it. The comedy did work for me, I gotta say that. So
And it's allowed to.
yeah.
It's not bad comedy. It's just not Brennan comedy,
It's
and
just
there's a
that's
difference.
fair. It's kind of bad comedy.
Maybe. Um,
It's not smart comedy.
but is dumb comedy inherently bad?
It's
Sometimes.
inherently dumb.
Yeah. Anyway, yeah, I don't know. I feel like that's kind of we're drawing to the a close of my
Drawing
thoughts
to a close,
on
but
V.
I do think it's worth nodding to sort of the other V's in the world,
Mm-hmm.
which this has formally been adapted 3 times. Once as a silent film that no longer exists. Once was this film we just talked about, and then in a just insane. I don't even know how this happened, but in 2014 there was a movie called V in Russian. It was released internationally as either Forbidden Empire or Forbidden Kingdom, depending on what country you're in. And it's an attempt to do an adaptation of this novel that is also like a swashbuckling adventure about a Western European cartographer played by Jason Fleming. And like he's the one who like falls into this farm and like has to deal with the demons. And it's this really bizarre mix of like creepiness but also action movie nonsense. And and it begot a sequel that has just an infinite number of titles. The one that it's easiest to find it in the United States is Iron Mask. But it was so put this on just think if you can balance this, Brennan. A sequel to this story that is an action movie starring Jackie Chan and Arnold Schwarzenegger,
Huh. Okay.
because that's what Iron Mask is. And it's
Literally
also
or
it is literally an action movie in which the top credited actors are Arnold Schwarzenegger and Jackie Chan. And the film is a Russian Chinese co-production that's pretending to be like a Pirates of the Caribbean movie.
okay. See, that seems like something worth knowing about.
It's it's a fascinating wrong-headed object.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm lost in a fantasia about what that could possibly be.
You'll
Um
you'll never get there. Also, Arnold Schwarzenegger is playing basically a beef eater. Like he's
oh.
big old red coat, big old bushy mustache.
Oh my goodness. Okay, great. Great stuff. Love it. You love to hear it. Also worth mentioning that Mario Bava's Black Sunday is loosely based on V, as we double checked before our recording.
Indeed. You said that and I was like, that doesn't seem right. And it turns out that it is right. It's pretty loose, but there's elements that evoke the other. And you have not seen Black Sunday, is that correct, Brennan?
I have not, tragically.
It is my I love that movie to pieces. It's literally one of my favorite horror movies. I suspect I'm sure you would like it more than this, for the record. Um, I feel like V and Tombs of the Blind Dead occupy very similar territory in my brain, and it is territory that Black Sunday is adjacent to. And I feel like given your response to both V and Black Sunday, I'm sorry, V and
And Tombs of the
Tombs of
Blind
the Blind
Dead.
Dead, I suspect you would find Black Sunday to be just okay.
Yeah, but so here's the thing. So I was not as enamored with the look of Tombs of the Blind Dead as you were. But I feel like I can for sure get on board with Mario Bava doing something in that vein.
That is real. The cinematography in Black Sunday is certainly at a level that is not demonstrated in either V or Tombs of the Blind Dead.
Yeah. Although I would V was a more satisfying aesthetic experience to me than Tombs of the Blind Dead was, which might be heretical to your views, but I do feel that way.
I mean, it's less heretical and more it's more paganistic. You can't be a heretic if you were never a part of the church to begin with.
That's a good point. Okay, good to know. Anyway, anything else about V? We've kind of diverted again.
I don't think so. Film's what it is. I think it's terribly satisfying. I'm really glad that it is now relatively easy to lay hands on it.
Mm-hmm.
It has been restored quite recently. I believe in 2018 it was restored by This or That Russian Film Archive and has since been made available high def at home. So easy to get your hands on it pretty much. I think it's a hoot. I had a really good time watching it.
Yeah, and I did not have a bad time watching it, and I think that it is such a historically interesting thing and artistically interesting thing that even though I didn't particularly like it, it's definitely worth watching, even if it's not quite your vibe.
Right. So you are a recommended, even though you do not care for it, is then sort of where you land.
Yes.
Cool.
Um,
Got it.
I think there is a less extreme gulf with V than with this, but I kind of feel a similar way about Skinamarink,
Hmm.
which is a movie that I hated. Watching it made me feel like I was gnawing my own face off, but as an artistic experience of someone expressing a vision, I was like, yeah, I'd recommend this to people.
Okay. Good to know. I At this point, I think I'm just going to hold on to Skin and Marink until Halloween season rolls around, and I'm just going to watch it then.
That seems like probably the right move. I do think you would like Skinamarink. But
I'm
anyway,
pretty sure I'm going to like Skin and Marink.
yeah, it seems like what's gonna
It feels
happen.
like me. My understanding is that it has no discernible plot and just a bunch of shots of nothing happening. So it
Yep.
sounds like I'm going to be at about a 4.5 stars on it.
Oh yeah, no, it reminded me of a review that you did of this that experimental film that I think you're literally meant to watch how the grain on the film itself is changing rather than the image on the screen.
You need to pin that down more.
Yeah, I can't remember. It was a while ago. Anyway,
What
uh,
was it? Was it film in which there appears?
I don't remember. Is it like maybe there's like an maybe it's just an image of a pot or something, and it's just a static image of
Oh,
one.
the Art of Vision.
Yeah, I think that's what it is.
Yeah, it's not a pot. It's a glass, green glass cigarette ashtray.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that sounds like what I'm remembering from many
Okay.
years ago that you reviewed.
Yep. Yep.
Anyway, so we're in 2 weeks. We're gonna come back. We're gonna be closing out Witch Month with the perfect double feature with V. We will be watching 1989's Teen Witch, which will be a first watch for Tim, and I'm so excited to
I
bring him in.
I not only will it be a first watch, I sort of hadn't heard about it until we selected it as part of our poll. Uh so I feel like I may have misrepresented to you a movie that I knew the reputation of, whereas I know nothing about it other than its title.
No, that is so wild because I'm really excited to bring you in completely unawares of kind of what we're
To
dealing with.
indoctrinate me to the Teen Witch cult.
Yeah, exactly. Um, yeah, until then, you can find more episodes of this podcast, the regular alternate ending podcast, Tim's reviews, my reviews, all kinds of stuff at alternateending.com. And yeah, I don't know. That's kind of it. Have a great week, everybody. Bye.
Bye.